I've started to record this. Okay. So we're talking about progressivism and we're talking about labor issues. All right. So men and women are both working in factories at this time, and the women would bring their babies into the factory in baskets. And what the women would do is they would all just line the baskets up along one of the walls. So you'd have like maybe a dozen babies in little baskets, just kind of laying there. And then the women would go to work, right? And then they'd go to work. And what they would do is women would just take turns coming out and checking on the babies, right? So a mom would come out, check on the babies, and she would like change diapers or clean up the babies, and then she would just breastfeed whatever two babies were crying. So not her own, she would just breastfeed whatever baby was crying, right? Whatever two babies were crying, she would breastfeed them, and then she'd go back to work, and then she would tell the next woman would come out, right? So she'd be like, you know, Joey and Mary were both crying, so I fed them, but you know, Bobby's crying still, so you need to feed him. And then the second woman would come out and feed Bobby. You see, right? So all the women would kind of just feed all of the kids, just however it worked. And so that was pretty normal back then. All right, which brings us into a problem. What happens when those babies become toddlers, right? Because our toddler's going to sit in a basket all day long. If you've ever met a toddler, you know toddlers are the worst, right? The only thing worse than toddlers is kids. The only thing worse than kids is teenagers. And the only thing worse than teenagers is, of course, adults, right? Yeah, right. And we know, I think we can all acknowledge very clearly that all of them are worse than dogs, right? Dogs are the best. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so my pro-dog propaganda. All right, so with toddlers, what would happen is the factory would have to open up like a school inside of the factory, right? So you'd have like a little fenced off area outside where the toddlers would go and hang out. And again, the women would just rotate around and take care of them. Eventually, they found out that this sucked, that this sucked terribly, and they would make people, they eventually will open up schools, right? So New York has schools, Philadelphia and Chicago have schools, but like places like Salt Lake City don't have schools yet. They don't exist, not really. Okay? All right, let's talk worker safety now. Okay? Worker safety is basically non-existent. Okay, they didn't have lights. You would oftentimes be working under these machines with like just lanterns at night, right? Where it was really dark, it was really dangerous. They did not have safety equipment. Your employer did not give you gloves or boots or anything like that. They did not give you safety equipment. There's no guardrails on anything. If your arm gets caught in the machine, they can't stop the machine easily. There's no like kill switch to the machine. There's nothing blocking like hot, like where the sides of the machine get super, super hot and like would scald you and burn you if you touched it. There's nothing blocking that.
Is this still under A, or is this a new letter?
This is all part of A, because we're all defining what the progressive era is. We'll spend almost the entire class on A just today, because A is really big. Most students end up being like a full page on just A alone. Yeah. Okay, so what ends up happening, the workers, so the safety is terrible, right? People are constantly getting injured. They don't have helmets, they don't have anything, right? There's no like guardrails on like stairs. You'd walk down the stairs and you just like fall, right? There's all of that stuff. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. There's also no protections for behavior, right? So like if somebody like beats you up or steals from you or something like that, there's no protection for that. Women, it's particularly problematic because women have no way of saying no to sexual harassment. If your boss like demands that you do something sexual for him and you deny it, he could just fire you for no reason. He could just be like, I wanted to have sex with her, she said no, so I fired her. Right? And that was 100% totally legal back then. Totally legal. Yep. And there's all sorts of stuff like that. Okay? So the workers unite for labor issues. Okay? The workers form what we call unions. So in your notes, you have one line here. You say workers form unions, and then a union. Let's define the union. The union is a collection of workers. A collection of workers that um, that are unified in order to change the workplace for the better. So the workers are trying to go for, we have it on the screen here, and you could say unions want, and then you can list these things. They want higher wages, they want better safety, they want better hours, and they want to be treated better. All right. The other big movement is that they want to end child labor. Okay, so it was pretty normal for kids to start working when they were about 8 or 9 years old, right? And it was very normal for the kids to be full-time workers by the time they're about 12 or 13. But 8 or 9 would be pretty normal to get started working. Pretty common. And child labor is particularly bad, particularly nasty, because children would oftentimes get beat up and slapped around and stuff, right? If I'm a boss, I can't really slap around like a 30-year-old man, can I? Like, what's he going to do to me? Right? If I hit him, he's going to hit me back, probably, right? That's very likely. But I can smack around a woman or I can smack around a kid because they're much less likely to fight back. And so what you find is a lot of really bad bosses will try to hire women and children on purpose because they want to use physical abuse, which was very common back then. Very common, especially towards children. It was considered normal. In fact, it was considered bad parenting if you didn't hit your children. You were considered a bad parent if you didn't do it. So, all right, that's it for labor issues. Okay, next, go one line down. Number 2, social changes. Social changes. The progressive era also has a lot of protests centered around women's rights. This is the era where women will get the right to vote. No, let me rephrase that. This is the era where women will get the ability to vote. They've always had the right to vote. They've always had the right to vote. The right to vote was just taken from them. It was, it was kept from them. Right? The right is inalienable. Women are people, therefore they have the right. But this is the era where women will actually get to exercise the right. The other big movement is prohibition. Do any of you guys, have you guys heard this word before? Do you guys know what prohibition means? Emma, you're nodding. What does it mean?
Was that where like they banned alcohol for a while?
It is, yeah, it is. So it's prohibition. Prohibition is they made it illegal to consume, make, or sell alcohol. They made it illegal to consume, make, or sell alcohol. Okay, and alcohol was a major problem back then. The average American man was drinking about 1 liter of whiskey a day. Right? That would be like a bottle like this. That would be this much whiskey every day. That's what the average man was drinking. That's a lot of whiskey. I hope you guys are not drinking whiskey right now, but when you become older and you find people who do drink, right, you're going to find that this is enough alcohol to like drop any adult, basically, right? It was pretty normal back then for men especially to basically just drink themselves until they pass out at night. That was pretty standard, right? And if the average is about 1 liter a day, that means half of the men are drinking more. It's a lot, right? The average today is very low. The average today is something like 5 ounces a day is what the average ends up being, right? And that's where like, because a lot of The average today is something like 5 ounces a day. And that's because so many men today just don't even drink over the course of a normal day. Right. And I'm not talking about like Mormons where drinking is prohibited. I'm talking about just like regular, whatever, Catholics, Protestants, like people who do drink, they just don't drink every day. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So prohibition is doing that. So women do drink. It's like a dirty secret of society. It's a dirty secret. No one's supposed to know. But women do drink. They just kind of drink secretly at home at this time. They drink secretly at home and they drink much, much less than men. Much, much less, like a tenth of the amount of men do. All right. The last one, number 3, government. All right. So government, this is reforms in the government itself. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, populism, conservation, and race issues. So populism is increasing the amount of democracy in the United States. Increasing the amount of democracy in the United States. This is increasing like the amount of things we can vote on. So when you guys become 18 and you start to vote, you'll get a ballot, and the ballot will have tons and tons of things to vote on, right? Most ballots, like in a presidential election year in Utah, will have something like 14 or 15 different things to vote on. It's not just like one. It's not just like Biden or Trump. It's not that, right? It's Biden or Trump, and then it's this, and then it's this, and then it's this, right? There's like 14 or 15 things on every ballot. So that's what populism is about. Conservation. This is the beginning of the National Park Service and blocking out. So we have Yellowstone. We have a couple of the parks exist, but they're going to create an actual like organization that runs them all, and they're also going to start increasing the ways to preserve like forests and stuff. Okay. And last is race issues. They're going to try to solve a bunch of race issues to make things more equal. They are largely going to fail on this. Race issues are going to be the biggest failure. We'll have a couple of successes, but not many. Mostly it'll be a failure. Probably the biggest victory is women's rights. That one is very clearly a victory, very clearly. And then labor. We get a lot of labor rights. Those are clear victories on those two. The other ones are like a little bit trickier. Do you guys have questions about the progressive era? In your notes, so the 1900 to the 1920, I want you to change this to 1880. So we'll make it a 40-year time period. Make it 1880 to 1920, a 40-year time period. 1900 is where the progressive era is like really, really active. That's where there's like a protest in basically every single day of 20 years of time, basically. Okay, but it actually starts back in the 1880s. Okay, so let's go to big number B and then we're done. All right, so big number B is the Haymarket Square riots. Haymarket Square riots. Okay, so here's our date, March of 1886. March of 1886. By this point, labor unions are starting off, right? Labor unions are starting off, but they haven't really gained a lot of power. This is in Haymarket, Chicago, New York, or Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, Illinois. Haymarket is the name of a square in Chicago, right? So it's not hay. They're not selling hay. It's a square in Chicago where farmers used to bring in their food and stuff and sell their food. Okay. All right. So so basically what happened here is the unions got together and they protested because they wanted an 8-hour workday. They wanted their workday to be reduced to only 8 hours. What do you expect management to do at this time? Well, oh wait, so they go on strike. Sorry, I forgot that part of the story. They go on strike. Kelvin, do you know what it means to go on strike when workers go on strike?
Isn't it to not work until they like make a change on the
Correct.
hours?
That's perfect, Kelvin. So a strike is where all of the workers leave and refuse to work until there's a change. Where all the workers refuse to work until there's a change. All right. So, Fernanda, what would you expect the management to do at this time period when all their workers walk out and go on strike?
Um, I don't know. I would expect them not to pay them, but
Okay.
as also fire them.
Okay. All right. So
I,
that's a pretty good instinct, Fernanda. Yeah. So definitely they don't pay. Definitely the management is like, no, screw you guys. We're not going to, or in this case, it wasn't pay. It was reduction of hours. They wanted to reduce the workday from 12 hours to 8 hours a day. Right. But management's not going to give them what they want. Right. Management's like, no, screw you guys. Right. But what management does is they hire scabs, like SCAB, scabs. Do you guys know what a scab is? Have you heard that word before? Not in the context of like cutting your skin. A scab in the context of workers. Sam, you don't know? Okay. So a scab is a worker who crosses the picket line and goes and does work while the others are striking. So a scab is a worker who crosses the picket line and does work while the others are striking. So
What's a picket?
picket line, that's the strike. A picket line is where they're all standing out there with signs. It's called a picket sign. You've seen them with signs, right? At like protests. Yeah, that's what we call it, a picket sign. It's where the picket sign is the sign where it's a sign with a wooden handle on it. That's called a picket sign. Cool. So scabs walk through the strike and go to work. Now, what the companies in Chicago did is the companies in Chicago hired scabs to come in and do the work. And then as an extra screw you to the workers, they gave the scabs 8-hour workdays. Right? They gave the scabs what the workers wanted. And they did it on purpose because they were trying to like pick a fight with the workers. They were trying to insult the workers. This is not a mistake. They were trying to do it. Okay? All right. So this turns into a fight, right? It turns into a fight. The protesters are fighting. The protesters are fighting. And so they call the cops. The cops come in and beat the protesters and kill 2 protesters. Cops come in, they beat the protesters and kill 2 of the protesters. The cops start shooting into the crowd and shoot 2 of the protesters. So the next day, the protesters come out again and again. So 2 days later, this protest now has gone on for like 3 or 4 days. 2 days later, the cops come out, only now the protest group is much, much larger because now the protesters are angry about the police violence. And so the protesters are protesting both the factories and the violence, right? So as they start protesting here, we don't know who did this, but somebody set off a bomb. Somebody set off a bomb that killed one of the cops. They set off a bomb that kills one of the cops, at which point the cops start to fight the protesters and they start to open fire on the crowds and they walk in and start beating the crowds. Okay. By the end of this, 7 cops were dead. By the end of it, 7 cops were dead and another 5 protesters were dead. And the injuries were hundreds of people injured. Okay, so we get a bomb. Somebody sets off a bomb, and we don't know who it is. We never found out who it was. Set off a bomb to kill the cops. And then the cops start opening fire on the crowd, and the crowd starts to fight back. 7 cops killed, another 5 protesters killed. okay? So the long-term effect, okay? As we go through the progressive era, you're gonna find a lot of times this is gonna come up over and over and over again. The cops are violent and they hurt people and people blow things up, okay? By the end of this time, by the end of this era, we're gonna have a lot of bombs go off. Americans apparently love making bombs because it's happening all the time in this era. Bombs are super easy to make, right? Americans have a lot of guns. We got tons and tons of guns, which means we have tons of bullets, which means all you do is you pop the bottom of the bullet off, pour the gunpowder into a can, and do it for about 30 or 40 bullets, put a fuse on it, you got a bomb, right? Bombs are super, super easy to make, and they cause a lot of trouble. They cause a lot of problems, right? And so bombs are very, very popular at this time period. We're gonna set off a lot of bombs. A lot of bombs, okay? All right, the long-term effect. The violence is so bad in this time period that labor unions learn how to organize themselves. And labor unions learn that they can't just let bomb having people into their groups. They can't let those kinds of groups in there. As best we can tell, the people with the bomb weren't part of the union. They were just people that wanted to cause chaos. So they weren't there for the protest. They were just there to drop a bomb. Okay? All right. Do you guys have any questions? We're going to stop here. This is a lot for today. It's a lot for, I know we only did two letters, but it's a bunch. Do any of you guys have any questions? Okay. I would like you to log in and take that test. Log in and take the test. Okay. And if you don't do well on it, then who cares? You just get some points for it, right? You just do something else. Okay. I'm going to collect notes from you guys at the end of the week. Okay. So on Friday after we do our lesson, take the pictures of your notes and submit them, and we'll add the points in there. Okay. I'm giving you a heads up right now. This week is midterms. So we're sending out midterm grades at the end of this week. Okay. So if you don't like your grade, now's the time to fix it. Fair enough? All right, give me a thumbs up if we're all on board. You all understand? Cool. In that case, I'll see you later. I'm gonna invite my,
See ya.
see ya. I'll bring my 12th graders in now.